So, Mr. Chairman, you should take your role. Zoning chairman should call his meeting to order, take the roll, and I think they have
Right.
some business of approving minutes.
Do roll call first, and then I'll open.
Oh, we do a roll call again?
That's what the
Okay.
agenda said.
Okay. So I'll do the roll
It's
call.
a new meeting.
Yeah.
I'll do the roll call in the order. Dr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Porter?
Here.
Mr. Menard? Here. Ms. Marandola? Here. Ms. Ramos?
Here.
Dr. Benoit? Here. You still here? Great. Okay. And the chair is here.
Okay, we'll call to order the Zoning Board of Review meeting, which is part of the Joint Informational Workshop for Planning Board and Zoning. Board of Review members only. Roll call, please.
Mr. Najarian?
Here.
Mr. DeZiel? Here. Mr. Mostyn? Here. Mr. Macchiantonio? Ms. Benoit? Here. And Mr. Grell? Here. Thank you.
Take my seat.
We get that? Did you get the name correct? Well, welcome. This is your first meeting. This is an unusual meeting to join us, but this is the beginning, so it's a good example of some of the diversities. We'll move on to item 5 of the joint agenda, which is review and approval of the Zoning Board of Review meeting minutes from February 27, 2024. Those were distributed in plenty of time for members to review. If there are any minor corrections or additions, if not, can I have a motion to accept?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes for the meeting held on February 27th, 2024.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, that takes care of our agenda. I'll turn it back to the planning board chair if you'd like.
Thank you.
No, the meeting is this.
Okay. Next up, Public Workshop 2023 Land Use Legislation.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I see I've lost the audience on this side and I've gained it on this side. So my name is Emily.
You're welcome.
We can be just as right.
My name is Emily Ennis from Ennis Associates, and I am working with you all on the updates that will be required after the 2023 changes to the land use legislation at the state level. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to give you a very high-level overview of some of the changes. We'll be going into lots more detail as we go through this process, and I want to walk you through what those changes are, again, at that high level. There's also some changes to your respective boards' roles and responsibilities, so we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about the next steps, which include an advisory committee and a package that will come back at some point for review and adoption. So with that, the General Assembly had done this 2023 land use and zoning legislation. There's quite a lot of it in several different sections. So again, giving you the high-level review so you will remember, we hope, the different concepts as we come back to them. But there are modifications to definitions, modifications to processes, modifications to timelines, and to roles and responsibilities. So some of the definition modifications, including expansions on minor land development properties, on the process of reviewing and approving major land development and major subdivisions. And I should say that with this change, with the changes to your zoning, will also come changes to your subdivision rules and regulations. That would be kind of the second part of this. It establishes new requirements for review and approval process, including timeframes for decisions. The Unified Development Review process is now a required process rather than being optional, and you'll see at this level, and then again when we come back to you for an update with more information, that there are some things that are mandatory changes and some things where you have the option as a community to do them or not do them. The administrative officer has authority to issue certain approvals in specific areas rather than the planning board. We'll talk a little bit about that. The technical review committee, actually this is an option, Some communities may use the technical review committee to also have those approvals in specific areas. I think the way that we're looking at it here is the technical review committee, which you already have, and I'll talk about who's on it in a minute, but have those continue to be advisory to the various boards. But that is, again, a local option. One of the changes to the Board of Appeals or the Board of Review is that they will now only hear appeals of decisions of the administrative officer. We'll talk about what the other, for the appeals for the planning board, will actually, any decision, instead of going to the Board of Review, there is a new land use section or land court section of the Superior Court, and that's where those appeals will go. And we'll see that again in table format. So at each of these, you're going to see so that was the Development Review Act, Title 5, Chapter 23, in the Zoning Enabling Act, Title 45, Chapter 24. I'll say one of the problems with zoning is that it's a lot of text and it's a lot of numbers and letters. So this is a lot to throw at you in one night, but we'll go through it bit by bit as we go through. Land development categories redefined, local ordinances required to be updated. Limits, the municipal authority is now limited in how it can restrict density and dimensional requirements for adaptive reuse projects. So that is an existing building that may be being used for something else. It also allows conversion of commercial buildings into residential or mixed use. And so there's new requirements around that. There are new requirements for the reduction of dimensional requirements on non-conforming lots. So non-conforming lots, you will be aware, but maybe people listening into this, those are ones that don't meet the existing zoning standards. And so there's, in the new legislation, there are ways of reducing the nonconformities to allow those to be developed. So the example Mark and I worked out, a local example is if you have a 10,000 square foot lot in an RU20, so it would normally be 20,000 square feet, the setbacks could be reduced by up to 50% of those of a 20,000 square foot lot. So in other words, they're reduced proportionally to the size of the conforming lot. So you'd move the 25 foot front setback would be reduced to 12.5, 45 foot rear would reduce to 20 feet, and the 20 foot side would reduce to 10. So basically you're making those proportional to the smaller lot. There's also, for each type of use category in that has a special use permit, you have to have specific and objective criteria by which the special use permit can be granted. If it does not have that specific and objective criteria established, then the use is therefore simply permitted. So it will be in the best interest of this process to identify which are special use permits or special uses that require special use permits very carefully, and then figure out what those criteria are. There had been a criteria that it had to meet the purpose intent of the comprehensive plan. That's no longer required under certain, that's been eliminated. So just remember that we'll have to come up with other specific criteria. And there have also been changes to the inclusionary zoning section. Notice requirements. So the notice and advertising for public hearings has changed. So publish notice in a local newspaper 14 days prior, and at least 14 days prior in the clerk's office. One other municipal building, and this is the big change, has to be on the municipal webpage as well. First-class mail to all property owners within the notice area 10 days prior to the hearing. And then if you're going to adopt, repeal, or amend zoning, so that'll be important for this process, publishing the notice in the local newspaper for 3 successive weeks, and again, at least 14 days prior, clerk's office, one other municipal building, and the municipal website homepage. I understand, we had a couple of colleagues working on this at the office, but I understand it can't be buried on the webpage, it has to be right on the front, so people shouldn't have to go looking for that notice. Unified Development Review gets its own section. So the purpose of the revisions to this is to prevent applications from having to appear before 2 different regulatory boards. So there's some updates to the language and the procedures. Part of that is designating an authorized permitting authority who is responsible for the Unified Development Review. And that's going to be for both any zoning relief and development plan review. The planning board will be that designee, so this takes a little bit away from the role of or it changes the role of the zoning board of review and the planning board with respect to this, and gives it to the planning board, so. And this is just a quick chart that talks about some of what I already had on there. A green check, oops, next one, please, sorry. I forget, you and I are, I just wanted to not have to do this to all of you, so thank you. So you'll see the green checks indicate that's where the role belongs. So planning board gets unified development review, zoning board of review, administrative officer does not. If it's not unified development review, the zoning board of review can still grant other zoning relief. Development review goes to the planning board, and then other review types, major subdivisions, major land development projects are with the planning board, minor projects are with the administrative officer. In all cases, the technical review committee is acting as advisory to whomever is doing the appropriate review. And then again, the ZBR is the appeal process for the decision of the administrative officer. So for those minor projects, if there's an appeal to those, it goes to the ZBR. If it's an appeal to a decision of the planning board, it goes to this new land court within the Superior Court.
What would fall under the definition of a minor project?
So I'm glad you asked that, because it's right on this next slide.
Oh,
I'm
perfect.
not normally that good. So these are called minor land development projects reviewed and approved by the administrative officer. So up to 7,500 gross square feet of floor area of new commercial, manufacturing, or industrial development, expansion of up to 50% of the existing floor area, or up to 10,000 square feet for commercial, manufacturing, or industrial. Mixed-use development of up to 6 dwelling units and up to 2,500 gross square feet of commercial space. Multifamily residential or residential condominium of up to 9 units. Change in use of the property where no extensive construction or of the improvements is sought. Adaptive reuse project of up to 25,000 square feet of gross floor area where no extensive exterior construction is sought. And then adaptive reuse in a residential zone that results in less than 9 residential units. So those, I think this calls for another chart actually, but all of those are what would be that minor development review.
So on one of the previous slides, it talked about having objective statement stuff. And yet in here, I see adaptive reuse of up to 25,000. No, sorry, that was no extensive construction of improvements.
No exterior, no extensive exterior
Right.
construction,
So
yeah.
extensive is not an objective word, so.
We're going to
what are
have
the
to
guidelines?
double check the language to see, did the statute define extensive? I will say, just jumping ahead to next steps, there is a series of technical amendments under review right now. So as we go through this process, we're going to be looking to see what those technical amendments were. Hopefully there's some of these definitions that maybe aren't as clear. If not, we may need to figure out a way of defining something that the statute left out, obviously making sure it's not in conflict.
Absolutely.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I just want to understand, so the things that are moving now to the administrative officer, I'm assuming that's our planner, is that? Okay.
Yes, that's
So, and then it says at the bottom that the planner could combine review stages and modify requirements. Is it possible that at times he would want the planning board to still weigh in, or is this basically saying it's not going to go through the planning board anymore and he can consult, or like I'm just trying to understand if there's things that he wants more feedback on and doesn't want to have to make that decision in isolation, like what the supports are.
Do you want to tackle that, or do you want me?
I'm not sure exactly under the new statute, but under the prior one, anything that the administrative officer was reviewing and approving, if he was uncomfortable, if they were uncomfortable, or there was an issue with that, they could certainly refer that to the planning board for their review and approval in place of the administrative officer. Most of these are going to have very objective criteria as far as setbacks and parking and things like that. So basically, if someone comes in with something under one of those categories, and it meets the objective criteria as the appropriate setbacks, the appropriate landscaping, parking and things like that, it's just basically making sure that it complies with the standard and you sign off.
So this basically just expands the scope of when you need to come to us or not, but it still becomes your choice.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And I will say that when I've worked with communities that have had some sort of administrative review process like this, I like to think of it in terms of a checklist. Can the officer go down and go, check, 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 they've met this? And if there's something that isn't met, then we define what the process is for that. Is that an outright rejection, or is it a referral to the planning board? I think what we'll need to do is just double check to make sure that whatever choice is made is consistent with the new changes. This is just the roles and responsibilities, well, what the technical review committee is and who is on it. So it's appointed by the municipality to review, comment, approve, make recommendations to the planning board or administrative officer. This is directly from the new legislation. It's possible that they could act as the administrative officer, as I mentioned before. That is municipal choice. And then these are the current members of your ad hoc technical review committee that are here, that exists today. So the building official, the DPW director, fire chief, fire marshal, police chief, and the town planner.
So Emily,
Yeah.
so that everybody understands, and that so that the zoning board can understand, when a project comes in that's going before the planning board, I do an initial analysis of the project. I write it up, I put a memo together, and I send it by email to those officials. And I give my initial opinion with a list of what I consider to be stipulations that I would consider attaching, and then I look for input from those individuals. Many times, especially with the fire department, they will have additional stipulations or requests. Whatever they request, I don't question. It goes in and gets forwarded to the planning board as a stipulation or a request for information. So that's the process we currently use. It isn't formalized. They're not designated in any ordinance or any regulation. The statute now requires formalization of that, if we have it. So if we decide to do it, and I believe we should formalize that, that would be pretty much what we're suggesting, and I think we would follow the same process.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's what you already have done for years, yeah, okay.
Just documenting that and putting it in the ordinance, yeah.
Would there be an opportunity for because I'm assuming town council has to ratify all of this eventually, because we're making changes to our ordinances?
So the town council ratifies zoning.
Okay.
It does not ratify planning. So what needs to happen is the town council will pass a resolution authorizing the planning board to revise and create its regulations. That's by statute. The TRC would be something that's in the planning board statute, so this would be approved and ratified by the planning board.
Okay. I was curious because it says appointed by municipality, members that sit up here. I didn't know if it was if council was gonna change their mind.
That's a good question. That's an ambiguity in the statute, because it used to say by the planning board.
Okay.
However, it is in the development review regulation statute. And the way the development review regulations work is that the council authorizes the planning board to create its own regulations. So the question is, who creates that committee? So I would say if the council authorizes the planning board to create that, and they give them that authorization, then the planning board is responsible.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I think that, the distinction is this, that because the TRC now has a greater role than it ever has before, they now you have a choice under the new regulations, that either Mark can decide all these minor projects in his office, all by his lonesome, with a stamp. Or the council can empower a TRC to work with Mark. And if the decision is made that the TRC will have some approval process with Mark would be the chairperson of that committee, and he would do that. But it would still be an informal committee. A lot of towns are struggling with this because we're talking, a typical TRC is, the planner, the town engineer, you got it. We're not talking public hearings.
Right.
Public meetings, yes, but not public hearings that are advertised where people come like this and get to
Right.
get up and say. That's not what they are. They're meetings during the middle of the day where they meet in their office and they review the
Yeah.
plans, they take out their rubber stamp. And I don't mean to sound that, but that's what the legislature is doing here. All these minor projects are gonna be dealt with in Mark's office, or with the help of a TRC. And he does not have the power to kick them up to you. He can't kick them up to you. He has to grant, deny.
Oh, okay.
And
That's
the
important.
denial, if appealed, then goes to the
I
zoning
get
board.
that.
That's an
But
important
he still has to,
clarification.
he
Yes,
has to
yes,
deny it.
exactly.
He has to deny it. So I don't, the reason why the TRC is different now is because they could have actually some approval power. So they'll be appointed by the council, but the council will pass an ordinance that authorizes you to adopt your subdivision regulations.
Okay, because
Does that make sense?
getting down to my question is, we're having a hard time filling up boards, and if we start another board, and then we have these applicants come to us, there's 2 members of that board, they don't have a quorum, then they get rubber stamped already, they just go right through the process, and then it could be something that's really detrimental to the town. So I just want to make sure that if we're going to have a TRC with the current makeup that's listed, that's going to be most beneficial to us, because if we end up with a committee that doesn't have a quorum, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, because those
Yeah.
positions are filled.
Yeah.
We don't have to create another board. So, yeah.
TRC
And it's
should
already
be by
practice we use.
petition, not by, it's going to say, the TRC shall consist of the BO, the DPW director, just like that.
Yeah.
Not the person or
Right.
not a person, but that title.
Exactly.
Whoever's sitting in that title, I believe you're in that title right now, right? So that's Leo today.
Yeah,
He showed up at the meeting. Now, what we've done in other towns is we say that it's the BO or each one of those are their
Designate.
designated.
Yes. Right.
So if he's out, whoever's covering the town goes to the meeting. Same thing with DPW, fire chief. So
Yeah.
there's always somebody available for Mark. And same thing with Mark. It would be Mark, and Mark would have the ability to designate Mark.
Okay.
Could you,
I like that.
Yeah.
Don't forget, they're all under this time frame. They got, you still got these deadlines. Mark has to make a decision within so many days. If he doesn't make a decision,
Right.
it's deemed approved.
Yeah, we talked about the notification notification timeline rather, but there are also decision timelines, and in some cases, they've been shortened. We don't want to overwhelm you with text today, but in some cases, those decision timelines have been shortened, and so we've got to incorporate that as well.
quick clarification if you could, I thought I read it correctly. At some point, I read, planning board appeals go to Superior Court.
Yes,
The zoning board would sit only for the zoning enforcement and building official.
right.
But didn't we just hear a contradiction of that?
No, it's
Or did I
exactly what it said.
misunderstand?
If Mark or the TRC and Mark denied an application, and they appealed that,
Okay.
you would sit on that.
Which
Yes.
is, of course, a distinction between the planning board, because it's not the planning board.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought so, but I wanted to make sure I understood that.
So that's the oh, you have a question?
No, actually,
Yeah.
Mr. Zwinski does.
Mr. Town Administrator. We followed that format of the technical review committee in the past. We also had the superintendent of schools on there so that they could forecast potential enrollment. The question becomes, we're a little different here in West Smithfield. All of those people on the TRC are appointed by the town administrator. So now we're getting into the town council going to make this board. I don't see the logic behind that.
Well,
Is there-
So the town council would pass the ordinance that basically formalizes the existing board.
Okay.
So, I don't know if there's, we talked about the fact that these were all staff members. Your point that maybe somebody from the schools, maybe there's somebody else that needs to be added as it gets formalized. But they established the ordinance, and in that ordinance, I would assume is a provision for, it's named positions, and maybe there's a provision to add somebody or a process to add another position in future if it's needed as well, and who would do that and how it would be authorized.
Thank you.
Mhm. So that's the overview, very high-level overview. I know with Mark that when he sent the agenda, he also sent a summary in a little bit more detail. I think it's about 11 pages of pretty much what I've gone over at high level in 5. What I want to show you now is the checklist of the things that we're going to be starting to work on. Mark and I talked about an advisory committee. I don't know if you want to say any more about that, Mark, but we would just... The process for us is going to be working with them on these bite-sized pieces, taking each piece in turn, looking at your existing zoning, looking at what's now required, figuring out where what needs to be changed and how, figuring out the format, working through the language with them, and then bringing it back. So it will cover all of these topics that I just went over. You can see I like checklists because there's a little box there. But there's also other changes to the zoning. So internal inconsistencies, either that are existing now or going through and double checking as we're inserting or modifying these pieces that we're not creating new internal inconsistencies. We're going to be updating the use table. So that will include either adding or subtracting uses. We were going through outdated uses we have known in various communities. Making recommendations as to whether or not these should be allowable as of right or they should be special use permits. There's a retail marijuana draft that we want to look at. There's a solar overlay, solar use drafts that we want to consider. There are a couple of sections of your zoning right now that Mark and I were talking about, some that have already been removed because they're better suited as a general ordinance versus within the zoning. I mentioned the objective criteria earlier. Right now, under site plan review, there is some subjective landscape criteria. So we need to define what the standardized, objective, easily measurable landscape and parking regulations should be and swap that out. And then I've got other options because as we go through this, as we talk with you, as we talk with the advisory committee, there's usually something else that comes up that needs to be reviewed and considered as to whether or not it's something that should get changed as part of this process or does it belong in another process. So our next steps with that are to bring the advisory committee into the process, start setting up those regular meetings. There will be public meetings and workshops as part of this. So, helping people understand what's being changed, why, what the impact of that is. Then we'll start drafting those zoning changes. It is important to understand that until you are compliant, the state law governs what happens. So as people come into each of you for review of projects, it is the state law that governs until your zoning ordinance or your zoning bylaws are in place. Rhode Island Housing, I should have mentioned at the beginning, is funding this study and this moving towards compliance. They have also created templates for some of the zoning. Now, templates always have to be modified to meet the existing format and the way this town does things or has thought about things. So that will be part of our work as well, is looking at the templates that were created and deciding what can we use out of that, what we need to modify with that, and that will all be done with the advisory committee.
Can you,
yeah. Sure.
Something that I read and then I heard, the criteria for use in the table.
Yes.
You indicated that if every use does not have a criteria, it is then by right? Did I understand that correctly?
If it's a special use permit use and you have not defined the criteria yet.
So are we currently at risk, if you will, whereby if we haven't defined every conceivable use, that if somebody walked in the door tomorrow, it would be granted by right because there is no criteria?
I'm watching Mark nodding
It's a big smile
furiously
on
over
his
there.
face.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah,
The simple answer is yes.
yes. So as we consider our.
Hold on,
priorities-
Emily,
Yeah, go
but
ahead.
we did just have an applicant come in for a temporary cell tower. And it was a special use permit item. They willingly applied for a special use permit under the Unified Plan Review to the planning board. So they came in, they applied for their special use permit, the dimensional variances, in the development plan review. It was quite an extensive agenda for one item at one meeting. This is what we're going to be facing. But, the simple answer to your question is yes. But if people are coming in, we would certainly hope to be asking them to submit. David actually months ago suggested, and we actually went through it in the planning office, go through our use table, figure out what are critical special use permits, what should be yeses and what should be nos. Suggested we bring that to the council. I have that on my desk. I was going to do a strikeout, get that to Emily next week, and perhaps bring that forward first to try to resolve those issues in advance of us moving forward.
Yes, and that's part of our next step is looking at that checklist and prioritizing it, understanding that the situation exists, that you're under the state law rather than your own. So certainly the table of uses, there may be others that we want to say, these need to come forward more quickly than other components. So that's part of it.
So I have another question then. Can we propose a moratorium on those items?
What towns have done in my other towns, rather than propose moratorium, we just made them all no's.
Oh, okay.
We just made them all no's. We made them all no's, so because the world between what a special use, well, not the planning board, but what the zoning board thinks of a special use permit no longer exists. The world has gotten a lot smaller. You can't say, is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? That's out. And you can't say, oh, is it consistent with the surrounding neighborhood's feelings? That's out. It's got to be something very specific, like a drive-through. A drive-through would have to say, a drive-through is a special use permit, provided it's got clear lines of sight on both entrances and sufficient parking, queuing. You'd have to be that kind of specific. Otherwise, special use permits are kind of going to go by the wayside. They have to be very specific and objective criteria, no subjective criteria.
So they changed the S's to N's.
That's what we did in some other towns. But I also suggested that they take a look at it and not just do them blanket.
Right.
Okay.
But that was because you're going to struggle with a moratorium. But you could do a moratorium if you
And
wanted
does
to.
that also kind of solve the other problem that he raised about if it's not covered, then they have it by right?
That's right. The state law came into effect in January 1st, 2024. There's 3 categories, and we're going to get there. There's things that you can't change, so it doesn't matter. It's a matter of bringing your regulations to matter. It doesn't matter. You have no discretion whatsoever. Then there's a group of things that you have discretion, and those are your decision points. And there's things you better change in order to exercise your discretion, right? So you got two groups of decision points, right?
Right.
In the zoning decision points and in the subdivision decision points. So subdivision is your world, zoning is your world. Your world now as well. Those decision points need to be brought forward to the council. The council will change the zoning. The planning board will change the subdivision regulations once they're authorized by the council.
And that's part of our next steps as
That's
well,
why
is to
we're
break
here.
it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Quick question,
yeah.
you said that special use permits are pretty much by the wayside.
I mean, the world's getting smaller.
Okay,
It's getting smaller.
to what extent does this law affect the special use permit section with regard to the wetlands, the water district?
Well, I'd have to look at it, but that might be arguably a specific criteria that could continue to be applicable.
It also refers to using the general
Say that one more time.
The ordinance as it's currently written.
The special
Does
use,
have-
the
yes.
special use permit ordinance? Okay.
6.19 has a section, but the last part of that section says you also have to meet the general criteria for special use
David,
permits.
I'll address that, if you don't mind.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
the point is you have
Yeah,
to create
so,
your own
Yes.
for that.
David, can I?
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So while we were going through that process and the committee was working with the councilman, and I was working with the councilman, you know, we went forward with an imperfect product, knowing at the end of the day that some of it, we would have to go back and relook at it. Now, there are clear objective criteria spelled out in that particular section for special use permit. You have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And then, you're right, at the end, there's that general statement. That general statement will have to be removed.
Right.
So,
You're talking about the water overlay.
yeah, the overlay.
I apologize.
Yeah. So, David, you've looked at that too. So,
Yeah.
so it stands the way it is. And if someone was to come before the zoning board or the planning board with that, they'd need to meet the criteria. Today, you couldn't use that catch-all at the end. You just wouldn't even address it. But we're going to remove that.
And then with that, to David's point on the two buckets, once we've gone through the zoning portion of it, we've got that set, we've got that passed, then we're going to be working on the subdivision regulations so that they're consistent with the zoning. So get the zoning changes adopted or close to adopted, and then work on the subdivision regulations, so those are in place. And with that, as I said, that is the basic overview. We wanted to just introduce you to the topics, help you understand that the roles are changing among different groups, and then let you know what the process is for the rest of this planning process, but that it does include not only the advisory committee, not only some reports back to yourselves before everything comes, but also this public process, so that before this gets to town council, before this comes back to you for a vote, it's something that people have had the chance to see and become familiar with.
Is there a timeline, if, in a perfect world, when we can accomplish all of these tasks?
January 1st, 2024.
I know. That was the timeline, yeah.
Trying to meet. Nobody has achieved.
Yeah. We would like to keep you on a very appropriately quick track, right? Not so quick that it's being rushed through, but we definitely want to keep you, because of the situation that the state law applies, we would like to keep you on a fairly steady timeline to move this
So-
through. I think we need to set the advisory committee dates, and that will work around it.
Last question for me is, if I understand this right, a city or town, including ours, you could make draconian regulations for specific uses that you may not like or may not want? Is there that kind of liberty in this process without, and still be compliant with the state law?
The answer is really, they're trying to get you to focus in on yay or nay.
Yeah.
They're saying, look, is this something you want in this zone? Put a yes in it. Don't tie so many strings and toss it into special use permit where people get sucked up in minutia that have no criteria that anybody can point to. Special use permit's supposed to be turned into a check-the-box program now.
But in the old days,
I know the old days.
prior to January,
Right.
any business person, any residential could apply, even if it was a no. And just say, I know it says no, but I'm asking for a special, do you
talking
still
about
have
use?
that right, or no?
What, I'm confused. If you're talking about a variance, that's still all the same. That
No,
hasn't
special
changed.
use permit. If it was a no,
Well, special use permit's never a no, it's an S.
no, but if it's an N, as in no.
It's not an N. It's either allowed, it's either permitted, or it's not permitted. That means yes or no. Or it's an S, means by special
Special
use
use.
permit.
But I
Means
thought
it's
there was a
con-
time when you could, if it was a no, that you could apply and say, I know you
yes.
said no, but I want to try this.
So
Is
what
that
you're,
process still affordable?
so what you're
Yes.
referring to is a use variance.
No variance, yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
use variance. And yeah, that still is available. I mean, the criteria for that is almost impossible to meet, and it's denial of all beneficial use except for the use you're asking for. It's almost impossible.
Which
to
is a
meet that.
mountain to climb, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost, but it does still exist, to answer your question.
There's not only a use variance, right? You still got dimensional variances. Those two variances are available. That really has remained unchanged. That really has remained unchanged. It's just about this, the most important thing they did is just clip the town's wings with regard to special use permits.
And the way I always recommend people think of as of right versus special permit is as of right is those things that you want to have in your community. You don't want to be putting, as you said, you don't want to be putting barriers in the way of things that you actually want to have happen. Special use permits are for those things that you may want, but you feel need some sort of additional control. And no is no, you don't want it. So unless the state has some sort of requirement for a particular use, I can think of a couple in Massachusetts where I also do a lot of zoning. If you don't want it, don't allow it. Is a simple way of doing it. But that as of right is really an important tool for communities to really think about what's important to them and then figuring out how to make that happen so that people are encouraged to do things that the community wants.
So we're effectively taking our comp plan and applying this to our use table.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
a great way of thinking about it.
I also
In a
really,
concrete way.
in a concrete way.
Yes.
I also like David's suggestion of turning all the S's to N's right now. Because somebody could come in right now, as an example, and put a heliport in an M zone right now, or an MU2 zone. I don't think that's not consistent with our comp plan, but somebody could do it come in tomorrow and put in an application for it. So I really like that N idea, and then working as the advisory committee or however, then we go through them, and then that way we minimize our risk. What I'm seeing right now is I'm looking at all these tables, we have a lot of risk right now. There's a lot of risk, there's a lot of things that we might not want to have in town that we would consider not consistent with our comp plan, and that would originally be our basis of denial. So I am 100% on board with that. Let's turn all the S's to no's right now and identify in a constructive manner which ones we are willing to turn to S, that concrete list that we need. And then maybe there's ones that are S right now, but we have evolved as a community since 2019 when we did our comp plan, and we want to say, okay, you know what? Yes, we do want to have that in our town now. Or,
That's true.
so, it could go either way. We could say yes, or there might be some yeses that we want to say, you know what? We've had enough of those applications. It's time to just say no across the board.
And I think to Mr. Igliozzi's point, rather than saying a blanket, change all S's to N's, we pick a meeting and we just walk through the list. It won't take us that long, but make that decision, as you said, to codify the comp plan into the appropriate combination of yeses and nos. I think that would be a worthwhile exercise for it, and I agree it should be done really soon.
I would just suggest, since it's a preliminary act, I would just suggest that the board, either comment or rely on Mark to just do that whole thing. Because it's if you're gonna take the action that I just suggested, some towns have done, it is a preliminary step. It is far from the final step.
Right,
It
right.
is an opportunity to close the door.
Yeah, it's just minimizing our risk,
So you're right. I mean, you could propose the changes, because you know us, right? So that'd be good. Can I make another, it has little to this, but were you at the previous meeting?
Yes, I got to listen into that.
So what about figuring out a way to either resurrect the master plan for these projects, or at least putting something in place about the pre-application? Because both applicants and the planning board get a tremendous amount out of it.
Yeah.
And it is the one time to do, I'm a software engineer, so I grew up doing engineering review meetings. And that's what you do, is you're proposing stuff, and now is the time to find problems. Because when you find them later, they cost infinitely more.
You are preaching to the choir, because I was also on a planning board. I have a good fondness for pre-application meetings and also neighborhood meetings before the proposal, the application comes formally to the planning board. I think we can talk and see about what's possible under the new legislation. Is it something that can be, should be codified? Is it something that can be established as a formal practice? So, yeah, we
I mean, I
will
like
talk
the
about
fact
that, yeah.
that in some ways it's been streamlined for applicants.
Yes,
And so the pre-application meeting does that because they don't have to go through even the expense of applying to have that. But on the other hand, you can make it required. At least required,
right.
for certain levels of development.
Yes, and it is a
Well-
huge advantage to everybody in the process to get
Absolutely.
the appropriate information out as quickly as possible, so that when people are either supporting or asking questions about it, they're asking based on a presentation that everybody has seen, based on a common understanding of the facts. So, yeah, we'll look into that and see what we can do.
I mean, we did
what's
get
available.
for at least Title 45, Chapter 53, Section 4, we do have a pre-application conference, and it does say a municipality may require an applicant proposing a project under this chapter to complete a application and all that stuff. But I would say, because it's maybe for our purposes, we change that to a will or shall require an applicant. Municipality shall require, because we have the option, so we might as well, if we're going to go in that direction, we should just say, we recognize the state law says the municipality may require, we're actually going to require you.
That would work.
And that goes back to David's earlier point about giving you all a list, which unfortunately I could not have for tonight, but a list of what is mandatory on the law and the areas that the town has discretion on adoption, so you can become familiar with that as well. And maybe we have another workshop after we've worked with the advisory committee to say, here are our thoughts, the advisory committee's thoughts on those optional pieces, present it to town council where it's under their jurisdiction, present it to you where it's under your jurisdiction, just let you know.
That'd be great.
Now, when you say an advisory committee, who's making up that advisory committee? Is it these two bodies right here, in addition to the folks that are over here?
Proposal from Mark.
Yeah,
Okay.
The council.
Okay,
So-
so it's a council act, not a
No,
recommendation
it's
from-
not
okay.
an official act.
Official, it's
So,
something is-
so we've discussed the advisory committee. I've actually reached out to both chairmen and requested that they participate, the building official, the town planner, the assistant planner, looking for a town council member, Emily, David, the solicitor who's responsible for the review, ZBR chair, planning chair, and Vivian, who's the new assistant zoning officer. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's a 9-person group at this point. Now, that is a working group, so that we understand. Obviously, planning board members can make suggestions, recommendations, as well as zoning board members, but this group will be bringing draft documents back to be reviewed. So everyone's going to be able to participate, but we need a core group that we can work with routinely, not trying to pull, a group together. Now, if either planning board chairman, I'll leave that up to them, want to designate or have a designee in if they can't attend a meeting, that would be perfectly fine. But that's my vision of the group.
No, I was curious about who's advising, and then what role these two boards make in making the recommendations to town council.
Well, so ultimately, the way that the process works with the zoning board will review the document. The planning board is actually the board responsible for recommending zone changes to the council. So the zoning ordinance will be coming to the planning board formally for a review and recommendation to the town council for adoption. With regard to the planning board, the council gives the planning board the authority to review and adopt its own regulations. So that is totally going to be on the planning board. Although there will be, the chairman of the zoning board or his designee will be also reviewing the planning document. I mean, there's experience there, there's knowledge of the community there, and there's an asset. So both groups will be cross-referenced and looking at each other's document.
No, I understand with a lot of these new law changes that the zoning board's role has been effectively diminished in the responsibility put onto them. So I'm sorry, guys. Honestly. Because I think both boards, even though our paths don't cross very often, we work very well together. And we effectively are on the same page. So I would hate to lose the insight from the zoning board members as well as because of all the law changes that have happened. You guys have gone through quite a bit of stuff that we've sent your way. So your efforts have not gone unnoticed.
I would ask, for that advisory, I would ask everyone on the planning board if you have any thoughts and stuff to send to me to bring to, I don't know when the first meeting is, so that at least that first draft that we present to the board will have as much of your input already in it as possible.
That's all I had for this evening. I thank you for listening and for staying on past your first meeting to talk in more detail. So we're very much, next time you see me, I'll be joined by one of my colleagues who are very much looking forward to working with you on this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Need a
So-
joint motion to adjourn, so we have
You
questions?
have to do your own.
Yeah, I'll do it. You want to do yours?
I have one.
Entire board. I believe we're in violation of too many people in the room this evening. The Fire marshal tried to shut us down.
Just, I
I
count,
didn't want to bring it up early. I would have been stoned by the.
just so you know,
However, for future reference, to recall,
yeah, I was gonna say, I took account. Yeah, I was gonna say, we were right around.
We were pretty close.
I was not, so we had 73.
Yeah, no, we did.
But it was recommended by a former fire chief, who came up to me after their meeting, and suggested that our next forum be maybe other than this.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, but we did not violate, we made sure of that. So I think the thing is for you.
It was close.
I have a motion to adjourn the zoning board of review meeting. Do we have one?
make a motion to.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
I need a motion.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second on the motion to adjourn?
Second.
And we have a second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned at 8:04.